How much power does a single telecom giant hold over a nation's economic landscape? Is there more to the story than meets the eye? Have you ever wondered how a single company could have such a massive influence on an entire country's economy? Well, that's exactly what we're exploring today. Stick around because by the end of this discussion, you might be questioning more than just the price of your monthly phone bill. The story begins with the myth that the telephone was invented by Alexander Graham Bell in Canada. While not entirely true, this myth underpins how Canada has tried to establish a distinct national identity separate from the United States. Unable to compete economically or militarily with its much larger neighbor, Canada has had to find ways to assert itself in the global stage. This theme carries through the rise of Nortel, as for a brief moment, it became a source of national pride that a Canadian tech company could surpass American giants like Lucent or Cisco. How could a company with no profits and declining fundamentals reach a market valuation nearly $500 billion? In the heady days of dot-com mania, the normal rules of valuations were thrown out the window. Investor excitement over technology stocks led to a detachment from financial realities. Nortel was able to exploit unique structural factors in the Canadian stock market to inflate its share price to astronomical levels not justified by its financial performance. This temporary illusion crashed hard when the bubble popped, revealing the flimsy foundations it was built on. How did Canada go from having one of the most valuable companies in the world to having that company crash so quickly and spectacularly? This is the central question explored in the first part of the documentary on the history of Nortel networks. Nortel, formerly known as Northern Telecom, was a Canadian telecommunications equipment manufacturer that rose to prominence in the 1990s dot-com bubble, before rapidly declining into bankruptcy in the early 2000s. The transcript provides a compelling narrative on how Nortel took advantage of unique circumstances in the Canadian stock market to inflate its valuation to unsustainable levels. Nortel's origins lie with the Bell Telephone Company of Canada, itself an offshoot of the American Bell Telephone. For decades, through its manufacturing arm Northern Electric, it functioned primarily as a branch plant carrying out the designs of its American parent AT&T. Northern found success by taking advantage of protectionist trade policies aimed at reducing Canadian reliance on imports. However, this had the side effect of increasing economic dependence on the US. How did Nortel transition from a branch plant to an R&D powerhouse? In the 1970s, Northern invested heavily in establishing its own R&D capabilities, such as the renowned Bell Northern Research Labs in Ottawa. This allowed it to develop advanced telecom technologies like digital switching equipment and fiber optics. No longer just copying American designs, Northern was driving cutting-edge innovation. This transformation laid the foundations for it to emerge as Nortel Networks in the 1990s. Northern began to change course in the 1970s by investing heavily in R&D and establishing the renowned Bell Northern Research Labs in Ottawa. This allowed Northern to develop groundbreaking digital switching equipment and fiber optic technology. By the 1990s, Northern had transformed into Nortel Networks, positioning itself as a major player in the emerging internet infrastructure market. The key to Nortel's stratospheric rise was exploiting inefficiencies in the Toronto Stock Exchange, TSE, by which it came to dominate the index. Through mechanisms like the Butterfly Plan that dramatically increased share distribution, Nortel inflated its market capitalization through stock price rather than fundamentals. At its peak, Nortel accounted for a staggering one-third of the entire value of the TSE 300 index. Millions of Canadians via pension funds and retirement investments found themselves overexposed, with Nortel shares making up an outsized proportion of their portfolios. Its valuation became detached from any reasonable assessment of worth. Why did Canadians go along with this mania? Partly it was FOMO and greed in wanting to benefit from Nortel's success, but the transcript argues a deeper motivation was national pride. In an era of free trade and globalization, with manufacturing jobs disappearing, Nortel appeared to demonstrate that Canada could compete in cutting-edge high-tech sectors. For a country struggling to assert itself independently from the cultural and economic gravity of the United States, Nortel assumed an outsized role in the Canadian imagination. Its status was inflated beyond reason or financial prudence. In retrospect, Nortel's downfall appears almost inevitable. Its fundamentals were nowhere near strong enough to justify its valuation. Huge R&D expenditures and ill-advised acquisitions were obscuring the fact that it had not posted a profit in years. When the dot-com bubble finally burst in 2000, Nortel came crashing down, exposing the hollowness at its core. The impact of the Canadian economy and psyche was immense, with billions in stock value wiped out overnight. Many Canadians saw their retirement savings eviscerated. However, the warning signs were always there for those willing to look past the patriotic hype. The rise and fall of Nortel teaches that believing in national champions at the expense of reason can lead to catastrophic outcomes. What lessons can investors learn from the Nortel saga? Investors should focus on fundamentals rather than getting swept up in manias driven by nationalistic hype. Nortel's valuation became completely detached from any reasonable assessment of its finances and prospects. While wanting to support national champions is understandable, it can lead to disastrous outcomes if taken too far. Skepticism and clear-eyed analysis is required. The story of Nortel is a cautionary tale of the dangers of irrational exuberance in the late 1990s. Technology stocks were generating tremendous excitement among investors. Traditional valuation metrics were discarded as quaint relics of a bygone era. Was it all boundless? Yes. All that mattered was boundless future growth potential. Nortel was swept up in this mania, its value multiplied far beyond what could be justified by a sober analysis of its financials and market position. How did Nortel exploit the Canadian stock market? Nortel aggressively engineered mechanisms like stock splits and the butterfly plan to dramatically expand its number of outstanding shares. This allowed it to exploit inefficiencies in how the Toronto Stock Exchange weighted its index, triggering purchases by index funds that further inflated its price. Nortel was able to take advantage of structural weaknesses in the Canadian stock market to pump up demand for its shares. Specifically, it manipulated the formula by which the TSE 300 index was weighted to make Nortel an increasingly large constituent. This forced index funds tracking the TSE 300 to buy more Nortel stock, creating a feedback loop that drove its share price higher, irrespective of actual performance. It was a valuation detached from reality. The transcript explores several interweaving historical threads that contributed to Nortel's meteoric rise. One was the company's transition from functioning as an arm of the Bell monopoly to an R&D powerhouse in its own right. This was enabled by trade policies that catalyzed domestic tech innovation rather than just importing from the US. Another factor was national pride, Nortel becoming a global leader, providing a sense of distinction from Canada's dominant neighbor. This nationalist euphoria bred a willful blindness to the growing precariousness of Nortel's position. What role did national pride play in Nortel's popularity? Canadians eagerly supported Nortel because its success boosted a sense of national capability and technology. After living the shadow of the US for so long, a homegrown tech giant was seized upon as a source of prestige and identity. This emotional attachment led many to overlook warning signs of Nortel's looming troubles. Nortel tapping into Canadian national pride and desire for high-tech prowess gave it a boost no facts and figures could match. For a country long frustrated by brain drain and domination of its economy by American branch plants, Nortel showed Canada could compete at the highest levels. This patriotic narrative made Canadians all too willing to ignore the red flags in favor of the feel-good story. The late 1990s dot-com bubble and its departure from rational valuations formed the backdrop. While Nortel was caught up in this broader mania, it also actively manipulated factors unique to the Canadian stock market to maximize the effect. Using mechanisms like the butterfly plan, it engineered massive increases in share volume that enabled it to dominate the TSE 300 index. This in turn triggered purchases by index funds, creating a feedback loop that drove its share price ever upward, irrespective of financial performance. For a brief moment, Canada could lay claim to one of the most valuable companies in the world. When the illusion shattered, the impact was measured not just in dollars and cents, but in the dashing of Canadian aspirations. The whole painful episode has left a lingering wariness about embracing national champions unconditionally. Fundamentally, it is a story of the perils of economic nationalism overriding prudent investing. Nortel made the fatal mistake of believing its own hype, as did the millions of Canadians who tied their aspirations to it. Its collapse left behind deep financial and psychological scars that the country is still recovering from decades later. The Nortel saga serves as a cautionary reminder that the market manias based on dreams rather than fundamentals eventually turn into nightmares. Believing in national champions is good, but clear-eyed rationality is also required. And that wraps up our exploration into how a telecom company might have played a role in shaping Canada's economic landscape. If you found this video intriguing, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. Knowledge is power, and sharing insights like these can spark important conversations. If you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, make sure to hit that subscribe button below and join our community of critical thinkers.